everyone, I'm Julie Cefalu, and today's tip has to do with joining your binding tails with a diagonal seam. Plus, I want to show you how I get those great mitered corners as I'm stitching the binding down. So let's go to the machine. Okay, I am sewing the binding onto this quilt, and a couple of things I want to mention is that I use my walking foot when I'm sewing the binding on, and I am approaching a corner right here, so I'm going to show you what I do when I get to the corner. In one of my prior tips, I had talked about making a little crease here so I know where to stop. So if I were to do that crease again, I just fold my binding tail over like that so I have a straight line, make a finger press crease in there, and that shows me where to stop. And I like to stop and pivot at the corner. So I'm going to stop right when I get to that crease, which is right there. With my needle down, I'm going to turn it and I'm going to stitch right out to the corner and off the edge of the quilt. Okay, now I'm going to lift this up and take it out. Okay, so now I've got the new side here. I'm going to fold my binding up and away from the quilt sandwich, so I should see a straight line from the quilt sandwich all the way up to the binding, and a nice 45-degree line right here, diagonal. Then I'm going to fold the binding back down on itself, so fold that right there, and now what I should see is that top folded edge should be even with this side of my quilt sandwich. This should all be even, and I should have kind of a boxed corner here. So in other words, it shouldn't look like that. You shouldn't see that. You want it to all be stacked right on top of each other, so it should look like that. Now I'm going to put a pin in this. Let me go over here and grab my pin to hold it together, and I'm going to start stitching right at that folded corner till I get to the next side. So I like having that needle down because I can just push the quilt sandwich right into that needle, and I'm going to start stitching right here. You can take a back stitch here if you want, and then keep on going. Now when I stop, I am going to stop so that I have about 12 inches of space in between my starting point and my stopping point, and some binding tails here. So I'm going to go ahead and stop right here, and then we'll show you how I sew my binding tails together with a seam, diagonal seam. Here I have my quilt sandwich, and I've left that 12-inch gap between the beginning and the ending tails. And so I want to close this up with a diagonal seam. And to get it to be just right, and this is my method, I'm going to take my binding tails and I'm going to meet them in the center. I'm going to fold each of them back onto themselves. So this one's folded here, this one's going to get folded here, and I'm going to leave a gap in between the two that is a little less than a full 1/4 of an inch, so a scant 1/4 inch. And if you have a ruler to measure that, that's great. This is my perfect piecing seam guide that has a scant 1/4 inch already there. So I'm going to use that, and I can see that I've got an opening there that's my scant 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to give these a finger press. So finger press one side and finger press the other side. And one of these I'm going to cut right on the fold. So I'm going to take this side, I'm going to cut it right on that finger pressed fold, like that. And this tail that I just cut, I'm going to use it to measure the other side and find out where to cut that. So I'm going to open it up, and I want to cut this binding tail the width of the binding. So I place it right on top so that the edge is even with the fold here, and all the way over here is where I'm going to cut on this edge. So I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut this side right here, even with that. Get rid of that. Okay, so now I've got my binding tails cut, and I need to stitch it with that diagonal seam. So I'm gonna get these so that they're opened up, not folded, like this. So they're gonna, let's say they're meeting each other for the first time, hello, and one of them is gonna turn at an angle like that. And then I'm gonna flip it right over, right sides together, so it looks like that. Okay, and I should now have my raw edges even here and across the top. And this is where it might be helpful to fold your quilt so that you have something to work on that's not tugging you too much. And I want to sew a diagonal seam from this corner to this corner. You can draw a line here from corner to corner. Another easy thing to do though is just to, again, fold it and make a finger crease. So fold it at a right angle, so I've got a triangle right here. Press it with your fingers and then open it up and pin. So I'm going to pin here and I'm going to pin here. And now I can follow that crease, and I'm going to stitch from here all the way out to the corner. And when I'm done stitching, I'm going to test it to make sure that it fits right inside this area, and then I'll go ahead and cut my seam allowance. So I'll be right back as I'm going to go stitch that, and then I'll show you what it looks like. All right, we're all stitched together. It looks like this, and let's test it to see if it's going to fit just right. Cross our fingers. All right, there you go. It looks great. So now I can go ahead and trim this 1/4 of an inch about beyond my stitching. Doesn't have to look too pretty. And I just give it a finger press open. Unless you really want to take it over to your ironing board and press it, you can. But this will do in a pinch. And then put it right back there. So now I will connect my stitching. I'll start here, overlap my stitches by about 1/2 inch, stitch all the way down here, and overlap my stitching there. And let me just show you how the corners are going to look. So here's one of the corners, and when you fold it over, it's just going to miter beautifully in the front, and on the back side you'll fold it so that it miters in the back as well. You should get a nice miter front and back. And let me mention the seam allowance. When you're stitching, you might want to test it out to make sure that your seam allowance isn't too big or too small. You want, when you wrap it around to the back, it should just overlap your stitching a little bit, so like that. It's nice when you have about the same amount of binding showing on the front as the back. Usually you'll have a little bit more on the back so that you can cover up those stitches, but it should look something like that. And you're on your way to some beautiful binding for your quilts.